You're listening to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast, home of the 2-hour deep dive interview with gold, platinum, and multi-platinum bands, including Stained, Blue Rodeo, The Arkells, Finger 11, Big Wreck, Moist, Bedouin Soundclash, I Mother Earth, Ill Scarlet, Neverending White Lights, Thornley, and many more. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, as well as share, comment, and like. Now let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are joined by a very special guest. He's achieved a level of mastery as the drummer for two of Canada's most iconic and beloved singer-songwriters, the diamond-selling Sarah McLachlan and the Academy Award-winning Buffy Sainte-Marie. So welcome to the podcast, Matt Starr. Matt, how are you? And how are you enjoying a little bit of a break before you head back out on the road with Buffy Sainte-Marie?
Great. Well, thanks for having me. First of all, I really appreciate it. This is I've been admiring your podcast from afar, and I'm really happy to be a part of it. So thanks for having me. Yeah, everything's cool. I'm just sort of relaxing here in SoCal and doing some, local. There's a fair amount of local gigs popping up again now, post pandemic, and I did, a recording session yesterday, just sort of like starting to see things get even more back to normal from where they were, and which is really nice. It's funny because for me, I sort of hit the road again before all of the gigs in town and everything else started up again. I was actually back on the road, which we can get into, but it's been an interesting last couple of years. But yeah, everything is good, and I'm excited about going back out in August as well. So yeah.
What most people don't know is that life as a professional musician, life as a touring musician, they might think that you're just out on the road all the time. And that's true if you're Foo Fighters or Metallica, where they play 200 shows, 300 shows. But with most musicians, it's like you might do a 3-week tour and come back for a bit, or a 2-month tour and come back. So there's a lot of stuff you got to be doing in between those tours to you can make a lot of money in a short period of time on tours and festivals and all those things, but what do you do in between those? So can you talk about a little bit what it's like as a professional musician in between tours?
Yeah, you nailed it. I think the thing that the distinction to make is that, a person who plays as a side musician like myself for name artists are not in the band, so to speak. And so, or we're in the band, but we're not part of a band, like you mentioned, the Foo Fighters, for example. And a lot of the people that I work with, for example, are people who go out for exactly what you said, shorter runs. Sometimes they're a little more extended, but they're often out a few times a year, and then we're home for also a large portion of the year. So for me, I rely on everything that I've done basically since I moved here, which is, I teach lessons. I have a studio that I record remote tracks for people, which is a really common way of making records now, where everybody just sends tracks from their studio, as opposed to getting together in a room, which also still happens because we're still, LA is still the sort of recording capital of the world. So there's still quite a bit of that. And then just local gigs in town and playing with, obviously a high concentration of really great players here and lots of venues to play at. So it's just one of those things where you do anything and everything you can to put it all together and keep all these different balls in the air so that, because it's a constantly shifting landscape as far as work goes. One year might be really heavy touring, the next year might be almost nothing or somewhere in the middle. So it's about keeping everything going and diversifying what you do, while not spreading yourself too thin, because you don't want to be, a jack of all trades and a master of none, I guess, if we wanted to rely on like a sort of old saying. But yeah, that's what's going on for me.
So it's the pandemic that mostly normalized the remote recording. Is that correct? Like bands like Moist, they put out an album last year, 2022, called
Yeah.
End of the Ocean. I thought it was one of the best albums of the year. And they had started where they were going to record all together. Suddenly, the pandemic, you can't physically be with other people. So it was recorded literally in chunks of every one of them recorded their instrument and they'd send it and they'd add this. And now, once we put three things together, we hear that this is missing. Try this instrument. Oh, backup vocal. It was literally a project that's just sent in the ether, and eventually an album comes out. And surprisingly, it was incredible. Is it the pandemic that's made that kind of people know how to make that work now?
The pandemic definitely took it to another level. It was very much something that was in heavy use before that as well. I think what the pandemic did was probably shone a light on, is certainly like situations like what you're describing with a band that's really well known or an artist that's really well known making a record that way. But the truth is, I've been doing it I've had a remote setup since 2006, which is a really long time now.
Damn, you're like
And
a
it,
pioneer.
well, I've always loved recording. So as soon as I could afford to have some gear and start to learn about it, I did. And because I could sort of see that's where things were going. Studios were starting to, unfortunately, sadly, close down. And it started to make more sense for people to have a place to do, especially drums, because they're an instrument that are actually really challenging to record. But yeah, the pandemic made it so that it was like the only way that people could make music together. And so you saw all of these remote recordings happening. You saw a lot of like YouTube, like kind of concerts where people were doing remote, even some remote playing together, which is really interesting. Like there's apps that are being developed for playing in real time online, which is crazy.
You can't have any lagging going on with that.
No, that has to be really, really solid. And it's getting better and better all the time, which is kind of amazing. So yeah, the pandemic just basically like took everything to another level. And it also, a bunch of people who didn't have gear before invested in gear, and all of a sudden everybody was recording, which is a beautiful thing.
What's cool about what you provide with the remote recording with the drums is it's one of the few instruments that you really need a great sounding room. So most of the other instruments are really close mics. So you're getting mostly just the source, not so much the environment in which it's being recorded in. But the drums, that's where like people have to splurge and go into an actual studio to record the drums. So I think that's an important service that you're providing that most people don't have access to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's true. It's I always joke with like my students or people who ask me, what do I have to do to get into this? And I'll say, it's something maybe that could be a little bit of a laughing thing, chuckle about it a little bit, but we have to have like everybody else can have one input channel and one nice microphone if they're recording acoustic guitar or something like that. But a drummer has to have at least 8 nice microphones and 8 channels of input and more of everything, including a room that's treated properly so that the actual tracks will sound good when you send them to somebody. And then there's just the learning process, the learning curve for recording drums is just huge. I mean, I've been doing it now for, whatever it is, 15 plus years, and I'm still constantly learning especially from my friends who are professional engineers about making it better and better and better. And I have friends coming over and helping me with stuff and showing me new ideas. It's just a never ending process, but it's because I love it so much. And I think that's important too. You have to love doing something like that. Don't force yourself to do it unless it's something you're really into.
How's the technology coming along when it comes to electronic drum kits? So for someone that maybe doesn't have access to a good sounding room or can't afford 8 amazing mics that are several hundred or several $1,000s, maybe they can afford an electronic drum kit where they could just plug in directly. Is that quality good enough that they could at least get by with that?
Oh yeah, that's actually an excellent point. A lot of what we refer to as samples, which is recording small samples of specific drums, or like for example, you have a folder full of bass drum samples, different bass drums treated different ways, And then once you have those, you just need some sort of pad or some surface to play on to trigger those. And then you can put that all together if you can play as a drummer, or even if you're, a producer and you have a keyboard, you can play it on the keyboard if you know what that's supposed to sound like. And the samples are so good now that in a lot of cases, it's can be hard to tell, that it was not done by a real drummer. That's how good it's getting. So yeah, it's really come a long ways. So it's very possible for people to make really great music at home if they know what they're doing.
Awesome. So I like to start the interviews by sharing how the guests and I know each other. That shows the importance of networking, of building
Yeah.
community, fostering relationships, especially in the music industry where it's all about community. Yes, you need the musical talent, you need the big vision, the goal setting, all those things, but man, it helps to actually be well connected as well. And you're going to talk about how, some of your connections have led to amazing opportunities. So in our case, back a few months ago, I did a 2-hour deep dive interview with Jeremy Taggart, former drummer from Our Lady Peace, and, podcast host and all these different things. And that, within 2 days had become the most downloaded episode of 2023 for me. And still to this point, now in the 3-year history, it's like number 3 or number 4 or something. So that was a big one. And I could see all the drummers kind of being filtered from his page when he was posting about it back to mine. So I could just see all these pictures where the icons were like drummer, 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 or drummer in the name. And,
Yeah.
I started to see, your icon would pop up. You would watch this clip and you would watch that clip, and maybe you commented or you liked or something. So I clicked on your page and I saw, drummer Sarah McLachlan, Buffy St. Marie. And I had not too long ago gone to see Sarah McLachlan at Blues Fest in Ottawa.
Oh,
And so
wow.
I had messaged you,
Right.
and when I saw that and I said, hey, man, I actually just saw Sarah McLachlan
That's
playing with a
right.
few musicians that I know. Was that you on drums? And you're like, yeah, man, that was me. And I was like, oh, that was one of the best shows at Blues Fest. And like, we talked a little bit from there. So that is our history. That's kind of how we ended up
That's
here
right. I was
today.
trying to remember. My memory for that kind of stuff is so is bad, and I forgot the part about you going to the show. I remember the rest of it, obviously, because I loved the clips that I saw with Jeremy. And Jeremy is like, we again, him and I only know each other through social media as well. Like I haven't met him in person, but years and years and years ago, in when I was, and we'll get into my backstory, obviously, but I saw Van Halen at what is now Budweiser stage in Toronto, and Our Lady Peace opened. And so I got to see Jeremy back then when he was, whatever he was, like I think he was like 18 or 19 or whatever. And so yeah, I've been a big fan for a really long time. So of course I follow him on socials, and uh, yeah, it's just super cool to see him and get to hear more about him, basically. So I'm glad you did that interview. It's very, very grateful for that.
Do you follow a lot of drummers on social media just to stay in the loop of who's doing what equipment they're using, who's getting what opportunity, who's doing a great job using social media to promote themselves, which leads to more opportunities, like all these things, I guess, to have what is it, to have kind of like an ideal of what is truly possible as a drummer, promoting yourself, all these different things.
Definitely. I think that social media at its best is about sharing, for all of us, sharing with each other, and learning from each other and getting ideas from each other, and just keeping in touch with people who you care about. And most of the people I follow are people I also know, or are, proper friends of mine. And then, I happy to say too that I've met some people that way, or even, initially met somebody on socials and then arranged to meet up with them, whether it's here in this city where there are a lot of people, or if I'm on the road and you have a chance to grab a coffee with somebody. I mean, it's really a great way to, as you said previously, make connections with people, which is such a huge, huge part of this business, but like genuine, authentic connections where you're not just doing it for, you're doing it because you're trying to build your community. Because the whole thing that I always say is that the community in the music business is about keeping yourself afloat and emotionally speaking, like I'm trying to, if I'm having a less than stellar week, it's good to meet with a buddy who's doing the same thing as me, because then I can tap into their experience or wisdom or whatever it is. And I like to think that I can do the same thing for other friends of mine too. And I really do value socials in that way. That's how I've learned how to use it, because I think it can also drift really easily into things that are damaging emotionally for people, where they see someone and they it's envy or feelings of inadequacy. So I think it's about finding a balance of those things, and then it can be really, really great and really helpful.
So you mentioned, maybe you're not having a great week and you meet up with someone else. It could also be just the energy, just getting the energy from them. If they're in a better place and things are going well, it's the peaks and valleys. The music industry is like the best and worst industry all at the same time. So maybe if you can meet up with someone that's at having a great week, you can maybe, get a little bit of that machismo off of them to pick you back
Absolutely.
up.
Yeah, just getting encouragement or giving encouragement, or because it's, as you just sort of alluded to, it's like this business is such that, and I'm sure it's the same in most businesses. The only people who can really, really, totally 100% understand what it is that you're going through are people who are doing the same thing. And being a touring drummer slash recording drummer slash freelance drummer in general is such a specific thing. And I had a buddy of mine say to me one time, it's like, I don't remember what number he threw out there, but like a few hundred, say overall in general, a few hundred people doing exactly what we do. Um, and it's like only those people really, really fully understand. So if I can get together with one of those people and either be the person who's having, a good week and share or lift that person up, or the opposite, that to me is like a lifeline. I've treated it like a lifeline in this, especially in living in this town. So absolutely.
You were talking about it's nice to get a little bit of encouragement sometimes. So I wanted to kick this podcast off powerfully. So I reached out to somebody and they provided kind words. So when I saw you on stage with Sarah McLachlan, you were
Yeah.
joined by a couple other musicians who are amazing. So there's Luke Doucette and there's Melissa McLachlan, and
Yeah.
Melissa sent in some kind words. So
Oh
this
man.
is what she had to say about one Matt Starr. So she says, Matt is a brilliant musician and one of the sweetest humans you'll ever meet. He obviously has a deep passion for playing. He thinks about his craft and he plays with heart. He's also sensitive to those he shares the stage with, respecting the song itself and the other performers. Hey, Matt, you're awesome. That's from Melissa.
That's so sweet, man. I just, those two are, I hadn't met either of them before I started that gig. And just, when you do a gig like that, it's especially first time, it's like, there's a lot going on, a lot in my head, a lot, just a lot in my body too, some nerves, some excitement, just a combination of things. And those two in particular couldn't have been, I mean, everybody in that camp, but those two in particular stood out to me as being, really just welcoming and supportive and sweet, and of course, brilliant. And let me double back really quick. Uh, I'm gonna correct myself because I'm wrong. I met them really briefly. Funny enough, like serendipity and everything. We were doing a Buffy gig about a year before, I think, my first gig with Sarah, or maybe it could have even been as little as 6 months before. And Whitehorse, which is Luke and Melissa, opened for Buffy. And I just remember, like, the first impression I had was these people are incredible, like the vocals and the guitar tones and everything just like blew me away. And so I did actually meet them, which is interesting, very briefly. But yeah, they couldn't be sweeter. And that's another thing that's really important, is like, being gracious to musicians around you and understanding when somebody's on, under pressure, and trying to make it as easy as you can for them. And so I've been in their shoes and in the reverse situation, like when I joined Sarah's band, and it sticks in your mind when somebody goes out of their way to be kind and helpful. And supportive. So I can't say enough nice things about them. And also, I will say one more thing, just because you brought them up. That whole band, that whole camp, was very, very, very supportive and there for me when my father passed away last year. And we actually had a gig like shortly after. And I couldn't have been with a better group of people to get me through that particular thing, and sort of, lift me up to get through, that situation. If they watch this, I'm very grateful to all of them for that, and I send my love to them. So,
And those two are so talented between the success they've had in each of their solo careers, and then Whitehorse, the two of them together, and then with Sarah McLachlan. And I have a kind of a funny story. So this goes back to the day I saw you guys, the Sarah McLachlan show at Blues Fest. So the day of, I had reached out to Melissa, not knowing she was performing with Sarah McLachlan. I reached out for some reason the day of and said, hey, I have a young up and coming singer songwriter coming on the podcast. Her name's Cassidy Taylor. And when I was doing my research on her, in her bio, it mentioned Melissa had like mentored her a little bit. So knowing Melissa, I reached out. I said, hey, could you provide some kind words? I know it would mean a lot. So she provides kind words. And then that same night, I go to Sarah McLachlan and I look up on stage and she's there. Like, I didn't make the connection that she was still playing with Sarah McLachlan, or that I just didn't think about it. So I had actually talked to her during the day, and then she was physically in front of me at night. So that's kind of funny.
Coincidences, yeah. It's a small world, I mean, there's a lot of people in the music business, but it's just like the smallest world sometimes. It's amazing.
Yeah, so we're gonna do a full deep dive of your life and career. Cool. We're gonna work our way up to all the amazing things that you've done, all your accomplishments. But we got to get started all the way at the beginning. So take me all the way back. Where does this love of music come from? Is there an earliest musical memory that jumps out at you when you think back?
Yes, very, very distinct one. When I was really small, my father, who played ukulele and banjo, and sang very well. He used to sing with me and get me singing before bed every night. That was like our nightly activity. And I'm not sure if he did that just because he thought of doing it, or because he saw there was something about me that seemed musical early. I never got a chance to ask him that. Now, actually, I wish I had, but regardless, there's like a cassette tape out there somewhere, and we've actually misplaced it tragically, but we're looking for it, of him and I singing, and that was like pretty much a nightly occurrence. And then he would leave, and one night he put a cassette recorder underneath the crib I was in and caught me singing more after he left. So I guess I was very music oriented from the beginning. And then when I was about 5, my mom decided to put me into violin lessons. So I started playing the violin when I was 5, and actually played that all the way through to the end of my high school years. So until I was about 18. And for a while there, I was playing both the drums and violin in high school. And I'll come back to the earliest part, but the school I went to, which was North Toronto Collegiate Institute, had a very, 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 very good music program at the time. It was almost like an art school, but it wasn't an art school, if you know what I mean. So we did these massive concerts every year at the end of the year. And I was literally jumping up and back and forth between the string section and the percussion section, playing drums, playing strings on some stuff. So I got kind of an immersion of sorts in those years. But just to go back, I took violin lessons starting at 5. I think it was group lessons at first, because it was Suzuki, which is a method where you learn mostly by ear, if people aren't familiar with that already. And then, I about 13 or so was when I sort of got interested in playing the drums. I just found myself like tapping with pencils. Literally, I have a memory of myself at either 12 or 13 playing along on my desk with pencils to Beatles music. And I should tie that in with my dad again too, because he had LPs of there's these two collections, which I'm sure you know, the Beatles, 62 to 66 and 67 to 70. One's a red cover, one's a blue cover. Their greatest hits. And he had those on LP, and I rated his LPs and I was listening to those. And then they bought me a cassette, greatest hits. And it was that I was playing along with. I was just getting hooked on the Beatles. And I was like, I want to play drums, you know? And that's how it began. I just started taking lessons at a local store, which is called Just Drums, which is still there actually, and they've moved, but they're still in existence in Toronto. And there was a guy, great teacher there named Kevin Ball, who's also still around. I don't know if he's teaching drums as much anymore, but he was very encouraging teacher, and that's kind of how it started. And then it just sort of took off in high school, you know. I just really got into it, and I just got I knew probably in my second or third year in high school that I was ready to, this is what I was going to do, you know, wanted to make music for the rest of my life. And to tie it in with something else I mentioned earlier, that also was around the time that a friend of mine and I rented a Porta studio, which is like they still exist as well, but they were these small, like about this big, cassette-driven multi-track recorders. So they, you know, you could. Do you have one there?
Look how old school
Yes,
something like this.
something exactly like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we rented that and some microphones for the summer and recorded in my parents' basement. We set up the drums and we had no idea what we were doing, but we threw all this stuff up and just said, okay, let's see what we get going here. And so that started my love of recording, and it all kind of tied in together. And you know, I also got into along with being in bands, which is this buddy of mine and I were in a band together. I also got into the high school big band, which was incredibly pivotal for me because I didn't know anything about jazz at the time. The instructor, our band leader, saw something in me because he had the opportunity to sort of bring in guys who were like, I was in 10th grade when he brought me in, and there were guys auditioning that were, say, in 11th grade or 12th grade, but he wanted to start me early and then keep me for the rest of the time I was there.
Were you on drums at that point?
Yeah, and I auditioned on drums, even though, again, like I had no experience playing jazz at all. But he saw that in me, and then he just whooped my butt for the first couple of years of that, being in that band, and really like turned me on to some great music, and you know, got me listening to stuff that I wouldn't have probably heard otherwise, or maybe not for quite a while after that. And that was all part of this getting me, you know, turning me onto the right stuff, so that the passion I already had just kind of exploded, and that's when I knew I wanted to go on and do this.
Have you seen the movie Whiplash?
Yes.
He wasn't that bad, was he?
No. He was
Okay.
tough though. I mean, he was definitely saying and doing things that in 2023 you wouldn't be able to do in a high
Cancel
school
culture
class.
would have got him by now. Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah. But at the time, it drove me nuts and made me, you know, anxious and like, oh, I gotta. But it also motivated me. He didn't make it so that I wanted to quit. He made it so that I wanted to be better, and I think that's important. You know, if you're gonna ride that line, you know, it's got to be with the right person who you feel can withstand that. And I think he must have sensed that in me. And he did it in such a way that, like, he encouraged me too. I'm not saying he spent every rehearsal beating me up, but he definitely spent some rehearsals beating me up, you know, and that helped. It helps. And there was a teacher at the time also, who I started to see, a Toronto guy named Vito Rezza, who was also very, very, very tough and very demanding as a teacher. And so I had all of these kind of forces in my life conspiring to put me on the right path. And Vito was another one. And he just, I mean, he really, really, I remember there being a couple of lessons that I wasn't prepared for. Like he sent me away with stuff to practice and I came back and I hadn't practiced it. And he just laid into me one time, and it absolutely, that moment changed my life. It really made me think, like, if I'm going to do this, I need to be serious. I need to really get going. I need to work hard. He was already kind of getting me thinking about, where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? Do you want to be here? Do you want to be somewhere like California or New York or one of these places that, it's sort of widely accepted that if you want to take your career to another level, you may want to spend some time there. And he got me thinking about that. And if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would have moved to LA. So all of this stuff kind of came together around the same time, like in my high school years, which were really crucial.
So he helped you when it came to like long-term vision of
Yes,
what's possible as a drummer.
very much. Yeah.
Okay. Did he talk about like goal setting as well? So things like, where you want to be, and then the little steps along the way that you gotta achieve to get there.
Yeah, the way he put it into perspective for me was like, hey, so say you want to move to Southern California and make a living as a drummer. He said, imagine how together you have to be able to do that, because that is where there is maybe New York, LA, Nashville probably have the highest concentration of the best players in the world, right? That's where everybody goes. So he said, now, if you're going to go to that market and put a dent in there and get working and doing stuff, you're going to have to be really good, aside from a whole bunch of other things, which I'm sure we'll get into. You have to be just really good at the instrument. You have to be excellent at it. And I wanted to be, but I didn't understand what it took. And he helped me to see what it would take. And, man, I still tell him that because I'm in touch with him, and I tell him all the time that I'm so grateful that he whooped my ass back then. Sorry for the language, but he really did, and in the best possible way. And, yeah, I'm eternally grateful to him for that.
So there's a few more drum mentors that you've had over the years, and we'll dive into those. I just have a couple questions about things we've gone over already.
Sure.
Your dad playing ukulele and banjo, was he like a hit at parties and campfires and stuff? Like those are two instruments that gets the people going.
Yeah, my dad was, and also he was incredibly funny as well. He was always chosen to be like a speaker at family events or work events or whatever, because he just had a knack for standing up. And my father was not in show business, but he could have been. And I think part of me being in show business was, I think he was resistant to it at first, but he like came around to it once I think he saw that maybe I would live out a part of a dream that he didn't get to live out in some ways. So yes, he was a very talented man, great voice, and extremely funny. I mean, he made people laugh constantly. He could have been a stand-up comedian or a comedy writer or something like that. I always thought so. Yeah.
Yeah, from doing these interviews, what comes across frequently is there's some resistance with family at first, but as you continue developing your craft and you start to become a professional and you achieve mastery on your instrument and you start to have those successes, the family usually comes around. So it's not that they don't want you to be a musician, it's that we fear what we don't understand, and we know that the music industry is a difficult one to achieve success in. So they just, parents just want you to have a great life and to take care of yourself and to be successful.
Yes.
And do you feel like there was certain achievements that you certain achievements you achieved that then you could feel your parents were like, what, he's passionate about this and it seems like he's going to be just fine?
Yeah, my dad. I want to also draw a distinction too, because my mom was, and I don't have like I don't begrudge either for anything, but my mom was like on board from the get go almost immediately. Like as soon as I said, I mean, she tells me that she knew that I was going to have to leave Toronto and you know, sort of you know, find myself in another place. She said she knows that before I did. So that's an interesting thing.
Mama knows, child. Mama
Moms always
knows.
know, right? Yeah. So she was always kind of right on with all of that stuff. And my dad, it didn't take him long. And I think when they saw me, like, you know, the first gig I did that was sort of with somebody that had a really significant name that they would know was this guy Christopher Cross, who's this, you know, famous yacht rock, as they call it now, artist. And they knew his music, obviously. And so when they came out to LA to see a show that I did with him, and I think that might have been a moment that was pretty crucial for them. But also, you know, I went to the University of Toronto for a couple of years in the jazz program, and I think me getting into that was a big one for my dad because, you know, it was one thing to excel in high school, but another thing to be accepted to a program that only, you know, it allowed two drummers a year or whatever it was. So, you know, I think they saw that as an achievement. So yeah, it's interesting what people see. I always tell people the one that makes me chuckle is like the rest of my family, like all the extended family, for years were like, what is he doing down there in California? Like, what's happening? Is he surviving? Is he? And then I played on TV with an artist named Lucy Hale, who's like she's an
Pretty Little
actor.
Liars,
Yeah,
right?
Pretty
She's
Little
a
Liars,
big
right?
deal.
And she was assigned to Hollywood Records and made a country record because she's from Memphis and loved that music. So we played on Good Morning America and we played on Ellen. And as soon as the first time I went back to Toronto after that and saw all my family, they're like, yeah, so proud of you. Like, it's great. You know, I mean,
We knew you'd make
we knew
it.
you could do it. Yeah. Meanwhile, I'd already been in LA for over 10 years at that point, you know, but that was something that they saw as an achievement. And it is, but it's also like, you know, there's so much that happened before that were bigger hurdles for me to jump over. And it's just that the perception of people in the music business is it's just different when you're not in it, you know? So yeah,
The old overnight success that's 10 years in the making, right?
exactly. Yeah.
That performance with Lucy on Ellen, what was that experience like? Like what does your day look like leading up to one song on TV?
Yeah, that's a great question because it's a real interesting thing. I've done it a few times now with different people, and I think that what's crazy about it is you already sort of hinted at it here. It's like have to get there super early and just be in place so that they can start to get everybody prepared for it, you know, including like a sound check and then I guess a little bit of, you know, manicuring of people and so on. But mostly they just want you present so that in case schedules change, a lot of these shows are supposedly filmed live to tape, right? Which means they run it all the way down. But I think there are certain cases where they film the music at a beforehand and then cut it in later and so on. So you're there all day. And it's this incredibly, to me, playing on TV is like the highest pressure that a musician, I think anyway, can face. You know, Ellen is live to tape, but like GMA is live. So like you can't screw up because if you do, everybody's gonna see it live on national TV. So you're sitting around kind of waiting, you knowing that this really intense thing is about to come up, and you kind of have to keep breathing and relaxing and telling yourself that you know we know the song, we've played it a million times, it's going to be fine. But there's always that thing you just kind of want to get it over with, even though it's really fun when it's happening. You kind of want to get it done because it's like, okay, I still have energy. I got up at 3:00 a.m., but I'm ready to go. Let's do it, you know? And a lot of times you're waiting way past the time where you feel like you're at your peak and you just have to like pick yourself up and go. So doing that has been in and of itself a learning experience about like pacing yourself through a day, because it's not that often that kind of stuff happens, you know?
I was gonna ask if it feels like just another gig to you when you get up there, or if it's just
No,
different. You're not getting the crowd back to you, and
right.
it's kind of a very stale environment you're performing to.
like they all have some semblance of an audience. Like, GMA, they kind of surround you with a few people who are fans, so they do that on purpose. And then, Ellen is like, there's an audience there. But yeah, it's like very, it's like it feels just different because it's like, okay, and go. And it's like all these cameras and all the lights, and the host says the band's name, and it's like, it's just very different. It's not like anything else. It's not like a regular gig, because it feels like what it is, which is like, you got one shot to make this really good. Like they can, on the live to tape thing, if it's a really big train wreck, they can start over and do it again. But of course, as a musician, your pride is like, I'm not going to let that happen. We're going to nail this on the first one. And I'm happy to say that that's been the case for me. But there's things that are out of your control too. Like operating. I remember with Lucy operating a laptop which had some backing tracks that we were using, right? So there was like extra guitars and some other things on that. And it's like, okay, so here I am on national TV, and I know my drumming, I'm feeling pretty good about that. But like if this computer decides to do something weird, I can't control that. Like I'm gonna have to pull a rabbit out of a hat. I'm gonna have to stop it if it makes a mistake. I'm gonna have to do something and then keep the band on the tracks. So you those kinds of things are running in the back of your mind the whole time you're doing it, and it makes it a little less like like live music is just like you play it and it's gone. It's out in the air and it's gone. I mean, nowadays with YouTube, it gets preserved to some extent, but it's nowhere near the same kind of thing. It's like, oh yeah, this is like a real musical environment. TV is, I guess, just not that.
Yeah, for example, the Lucy Hale performance on Ellen has 1 million views on YouTube. So
Yeah.
it's you want to play it, you want it to be great, and it's also captured forever. Like 1 million
Yeah.
people have seen that. So it's like if you made a mistake, you can't escape, especially now in where today everything lives online forever. So
Yeah, I'm like glad I wore a nice shirt that day.
yeah, it's funny. So you mentioned Good Morning America. You mentioned Ellen. You were also on James Corden with Amanda Shires. Is that
Right.
right?
Yeah,
And
that was more recently. Yeah. Yeah.
what would you say is the big difference between the three? Were they all feeling pretty similar? That they're all high, you know, very watched TV shows you were playing on, or was it felt very different? All three of them.
I'd say they're pretty similar. Maybe the main difference for me would be that the later, like the further on in my career that I've done those kinds of things, the less kind of the less pressure I feel. Like the mountain is sort of gone a little bit for me, where I feel a little more relaxed about the whole thing. I feel more confident in myself more than anything else. And I feel more confident in my ability to sort of like, I mean, a drummer our primary role in a lot of ways is to sort of corral everybody, to bring everybody together in the moment. And I would say that I feel more confident in that just from all the experiences I've had, not just TV experiences, but everything that, I feel good about the idea that if something around me goes wrong, I'll be okay. I can still keep everybody, connected. So I would say that's the main difference, because they're all kind of similar. Like the pressure feels the same. Again, the live thing, like GMA is a whole other level, because, you just know that people are literally watching it as you're doing it, as opposed to the other two where they will see it later.
When I ask musicians if they get nervous before playing on TV or playing a festival,
Yeah.
they're almost always not nervous for their actual performance, because they're ready. They know they're ready. They've practiced. They've got this. They've visualized things going well for them. It's almost always what you said. It's the technology. Like, will there be feedback? Will my monitor, my in-ears go down? Will guitar strings break? It's always like the X factors that make them
Yeah.
a little nervous, or the laptop, the technology stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll tell a funny story that's not actually mine. I'll keep it quick, but I have a buddy who played with a band called Gautier. So like you probably know them. Yeah. And they were playing Coachella, and they were the headliner on Sunday, I think. This was 10 years ago or so. and they played to a lot of tracks because they had a whole bunch of stuff on the record that they would have had to have like 1,000 people on stage. So they had a 5 or 6 piece band and then a bunch of stuff on tracks. So when there's tracks, there's an accompanying click track, right, to keep everybody together. Everybody's hearing it in their ears. And of course, the most important person to be hearing that is the drummer, because that's the person who has to keep everybody together. And the in ears are connected to like a wireless pack, right? Or they don't always have to be, but his was. They could be hardwired, but his was a wireless pack, and the wireless pack went out in the middle of the first song. So the click is suddenly just gone, and he had his drum tech was off stage and could tell by the look on his face that had happened, and sort of started doing this in real time to keep him with the click while another guy went up and switched out the pack or changed the battery or whatever and put it back on. And somehow he stayed with everything, which is like miraculous.
Give this man a raise.
Give him a raise. And that's the kind of stuff that's our worst nightmare scenario. That's what I think about. And so, by the way, because of that, I have always hardwired myself since he told me about that. I never take a wireless pack anymore, because that's one thing I know I can take out as a factor that I can be sure will never happen to me, and that makes me feel better about it.
So Gotcha, that's the somebody that I used to know, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
So
yeah.
What's funny is you were talking about on the record, there's just so much going on that you would need some backing tracks live to reproduce that. So that song, Somebody That I Used to Know, is one of my favorite produced songs of all time. So listening with a good pair of headphones, that song is like a master class in like ear candy and harmonies and production and things coming in and out. There's literally a thousand things happening in that one song. And to the general listener that's just hearing it play over speakers, they're hearing a guitar and a vocal and backups. But man, if you haven't listened to that in a long time, listen with headphones. It is just a work of art, which is funny because the music video is also one of the best music videos and is a work of art. So I feel like the song, the recording, and the video, they did a masterful job of presenting it on a plate in all the mediums possible.
Oh man, it really is. And that the crazy thing is, because that of my friend, I know a little bit more. I mean, I think some of this is public knowledge, but like, I mean, Gautier, aka Gautier, I mean, his name is Wally. He like made that whole record by himself. He locked himself away somewhere in, I think it's like a, second home or something, and just took all these samples and used a bunch of different things, like a lot of samples on that record, drums and orchestras and various things, and made the record by himself, which is insane. And then he had the huge task of like hiring or having a live band reproduce as much of that as he could on stage. And like, what did that mean for a drummer? Because there's no real drums on the record. And so I heard about all of that stuff through my buddy. And yeah, he's an absolutely fantastic artist. And I hope he makes some music again soon, because he hasn't been doing anything, but we'll see. Hopefully at some point we'll hear some more from him.
That reminds me of the debut album from Bon Iver, where he was sick and he locked himself in like a cabin or something, and he made the whole album. It's like he was sick, he was poor, he was, the depression, all that stuff. And he just resurfaces after all this time with what is considered one of the greatest albums of all time. Like, it's on the list of Rolling Stone's 500 greatest albums of all time, and he's gone on to sell millions, and he's a huge artist, and he's on a bunch of Kanye West albums and singles. Like, he's made it, and it comes back to the same thing, just one guy making an album. And it's like, if that album didn't pan out, that might have been it. You wouldn't have heard anything else from him. So it's wild.
Yeah, man, it's amazing. Some of these guys are so incredibly talented that they can just make a whole record by themselves. Like, obviously McCartney's one of the first ones that comes to mind. Like, his first solo record was just him on his Scottish farm with a sort of thrown together studio, playing everything: bass, drums, keyboards, guitars, vocals, and just an incredible record, incredible songs, just such a force. These guys are forces of nature, to be able to do that. It's stunning.
I'm glad you brought up McCartney, because I wanted to touch back on the Beatles being there at the beginning, you listening to those albums that got you into drumming. What was it about the Beatles that sank its claws into you at the start? What was it?
Well, that's a great question. And actually, the first thing that pops into my head when you ask that is like, for me, everything in my whole life, career, has been about songs. Like, I love songs. I will do anything to get myself or get my hands or my ears on a song I haven't heard before that's great. So I'm constantly searching. And I think that started with them, where, I mean, literally every song is brilliant. And it just grabbed me. I mean, the drumming grabbed me. And I think the thread there is probably just, the drumming is so oriented towards the song, is so in service of the song, which is what is my ultimate goal as a musician, is to serve other people's songs. I don't write music myself. I like to help people achieve their vision and their songs. I like to enhance or bring to life other people's music. That's just what's in my heart. So I guess that's where that started, was with them. Totally on instinct, though, not like I was thinking that way then. It's just like, I just, like everybody else, I loved listening so much to those songs. I would listen to the cassettes over and over again and wear them out, and got them all on cassette first. And then a couple of years later, I bought them all on CD because CDs started to become a big thing. And I mean, just like, and then like 10 years ago, I bought them all on LP because I got into vinyl. So it's like I bought all that music a million times because it's so good to me. I just want to keep hearing it and rediscovering it.
And I remember a few years ago, there was a hit single. So it was Kanye West featuring Rihanna and Paul McCartney. So it was 4 or 5 seconds, which is a catchy song. And this is funny. So they were performing, the three of them. I believe it was the Grammys. They were performing those songs. And afterwards,
yeah.
the internet always wins. So afterwards, all these young musicians, or not young musicians, but young people on the internet started posting about Paul McCartney, saying, who's this old guy performing with Rihanna and Kanye? Or, man, how is this new artist making it big now at this age? Like, just the comments of people that had no idea who Paul McCartney was, or the Beatles, because they're too young. So you could see compilations of the best of those people that just had no clue. And
I love it.
It was so funny.
It's pretty funny. Yeah. And I hope, and I think probably that would also get some people into it, because there's one thing I do see is that, like, you still see like kids that will, like, if I'm on a gig where it's just like a cover gig or something and people play a Beatles song, you can see like people of all ages like singing along or being into it, or their faces light up, because that music is just like, I guess it'll just keep going like that. I mean, I can't imagine anybody hearing it and not connecting with it in some way.
Yeah, I don't know how old Paul McCartney is now, but he just headlined like Lollapalooza or Coachella or one of the big ones. And the headline was, he's officially the oldest person to headline, because, the person that's cool is like Billie Eilish, 23 years old, headlining. So I thought that was awesome as well, that
So
he's
awesome.
still, he's the man, that guy.
Or like the clips that surfaced like a week or two ago of him attending the Beyonce concert, like just stoked to be there, and just, I mean, he's just a guy that, I mean, obviously just adores music from every angle. And I think that to me is everything. I want to spend my life around people or listening to people who love music. And that's like yourself, it's like we're all just, the whole reason we do all of this is because we love music so much.
So let's dive back into some of those mentors you've had over the years for drums. And I have a fan question sent in that
Oh,
ties all
cool.
that together. So you might know this person. So the fan question is from Paul Zool,
Oh, I know
who
Paul.
is
Yeah.
Drum Wonderland on Instagram.
Yeah.
So he says, Matt is a sweetheart and, of course, a master musician. I had the privilege to be a student at Lama in 2012, 2013. Please ask him about his lessons with Joe Morello and if he could share some insight and stories about that. Cheers from Austria. We're going
Uh,
global today.
I love Paul. Yeah, Paul is one of my favorite students I've ever had, and um, studying with Joe Morello, I've said this a lot before, but I'll keep saying it. It was a life changing experience because he I was ostensibly there for technique, for learning how to hold the sticks properly and how to physically play properly. And of course, that's what a large majority of what we were doing was geared towards that. And at the same time, his whole perspective on music and how your technique and your ability to play the instrument um, is to be in service of music. That was the part that was life changing. So, because I had had some of those things before, but I'd never encountered somebody who was so um, fluent, so beautifully perfect technically on the instrument, who was also so great at playing music as well, and had played with legends. And he preached that, like he said, you know, this what we're learning right now is a means to an end. It's a means to getting to play music with people and making music sound good and getting a great sound from the instrument. So I've tried to carry that on by teaching people like Paul you know, I would say a handful, only because I introduce some of this stuff to people, and some people go really deep with it. And I would say only it's like a smaller group of people that go super deep with it. And then there's people who understand it to some extent. But it takes a lot of dedication, a lot of time. And Paul is one of the people who put that time in and sees the benefits of it. And every day when I sit down to play, I think of Joe, and the sound that I draw from the instrument is because of him. You know, he showed me, and it's not that he gave me a sound. He opened my mind and my ears to what was my personal sound. He wanted me to discover what my personal sound was, and that's what happened. And so I thank him, you know, every day for that thing, because it's a life changer. The thing that people, you know, seem to, the common theme with when people talk about, when someone will say, hey, what's Matt's thing, or what's Matt's sound, they'll just say something to the effect of, drummers compliment each other on their touch. And that's the compliment I get a lot, which is like, I love your touch, I love your sound. And I always say that if it wasn't for Joe, I don't know that I would have discovered it as easily or as quickly. And so it's a little bit of an abstract thing, but that's what it is. It's about playing music and getting a great sound.
And originally you thought this would be just like one session or two sessions, and it became like a lifelong thing.
Yeah, so good. That's actually a cool story. So I was uh all right. I went to the University of Toronto for 2 years, like I mentioned before. And not to say anything disparaging about anybody or the program, but it wasn't for me at the time. I wasn't, for various different reasons, I wasn't able to practice like I wanted to. And I really wanted to just dig in and practice 8 hours a day. So thanks to my mom, who was supportive of all my seemingly like crazy ideas, I said, I want to drop out. And and my mom said, okay, if you know what you're doing and you know what you want to do, then let's do that. And that happened partly because we took a trip to New York, my mom and my brother and I, from Toronto, which, as you know, is a short 1 hour flight. And I had looked up, like I thought, okay, we're going to New York. I got to find somebody in the city to take a lesson with while I'm there, because it's just there's so many great players there, right? So I'm leafing through a magazine called Modern Drummer Magazine, which is still sort of the #1 drummer magazine. And at the time, in the back, this is all pre-internet, they had an ad that they posted for free for him every month, out of courtesy to him, because he was such a legend, that, you know, Joe Morello now accepting students in the New York area. And it said, listed a phone number, and said, call for evaluation. So I called the number, and all that was like he had a friend who was a lawyer who was a screener for him. And he said, well, what are you doing? And I said, well, I'm, you know, presently at the University of Toronto, I'm studying jazz. And he said, okay, so you're serious. He's like, here's the home phone number. So I call, and I spoke to Joe's wife and booked a lesson. And I went. So when we were in New York, we all got on a bus from Port Authority Station in the middle of Manhattan and went out to New Jersey, where he was teaching. And I had a lesson with him. And I thought, yeah, I'll just pick up some pointers on my technique and go home and practice it, and that'll be great. And yeah, right away, he kind of saw all my weaknesses and all the stuff he wanted to work on with me and started listing them, and in a really beautifully polite way. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. This is like, I better figure out what I want to do here. And I bought, a video, and I went home and started watching the video and took all the stuff he had given me to practice. And I was like, this can't be the only lesson I have. This has got to be a thing. And that was my second crazy idea. It's like, I'm going to drop out and I want to study with Joe. And somehow my dad was, I think, probably a little hesitant at first, but my mom was right there and said, okay, yeah, I trust that you know what you're doing here. And I had a job at the time in the summers working in Bracebridge, actually, at a resort there. And I would work there. This happened a couple of years in a row. I worked 3 or 4 months, spring and summer, and made a bunch of money and came back. And my parents allowed me to stay at their place. And I paid for my travel and my lessons to go see Joe. And I would go see him. It depended, but it was like a few times a year, and I would stay for a few days and have a couple of lessons and gather a bunch of information, come home, and I was shedding every day, like sometimes as much as 12 or 14 hours a day, for like a solid year and a half. And before I moved out to LA. And that was like my school. I made my own school, I guess. And I always tell people, when I have students now, I say to them, this doesn't have to go any particular way. You have to have a vision for where you want to go with this, and then come up with a plan. And the music business is such that you don't need a formal education or a plaque on the wall to get gigs, right? Like, nobody cares where you went to school or who you studied. They might care who you studied with, but they really only care about primarily how you sound when you're there. And if it comes out later, oh yeah, you went to Berkeley too, oh, so did I. But it's really not important. Nobody asks you that, right? So it was a moment. It was like a leap of faith for me to go for that. But I really felt like studying with him would change my life, and it did. So yeah.
And he taught you how to manipulate the drums through sound production as well?
Yeah, that's like my fancy way of saying he taught me how to draw a sound from the instrument in a way that like he taught me how to get the most out of the instrument with my hands, how to hit a drum and have it sing. It is the simplest way of putting it. And there's a lot to that, right? There's a lot, because really what you're doing is you're connecting your body with your ears, because your ears, as a musician, you already hear things the way you want them to be. It's about getting that to happen physically by how you play. And for a lot of people at the beginning, there's this huge gap between those two things. And what you're doing over time is you're connecting those two things so that at a certain point they just become like this. And that's what he started me on the journey towards. And the other thing I always tell people is that's the other part of that. Somebody has to introduce you to those concepts, and then you have to work like crazy at it to make it happen.
And there's one more drummer that was crucial to helping you become the drummer you are today. Do you want to talk about him a little bit?
Yeah, so then there was Jim Chapin, and Jim was another guy in the same sort of league as Joe Morello, which was to say they were both, first of all, they were friends, which was cool. So when I wanted to study with Jim, sort of asked Joe permission, like, are you okay with this? I want to go have a lesson with him. And he said, absolutely, you should do that. And I ended up having about 6 lessons with Jim altogether. And he was like a finishing school, so to speak, or like a graduate school for me, like he took everything I had learned with Joe, introduced a couple of other concepts to me, and just kind of put me over the top as far as like my technique goes, as far as how I approach the instrument physically. And he opened up something for me, which Joe did to some extent, but Jim was sort of more versed in the idea of like what it means to play the instrument with power and volume, especially for like bigger stages and louder situations, and preparing yourself to doing that so that you don't like physically harm yourself. That's Jim's specialty. And so he again like kind of really changed my life profoundly with just sort of teaching me the basis of this one technique that's called the Moeller technique, which is like Moeller was a person. He compiled his technique by watching early marching drummers and how they would play on these rope drums and drums with animal skin, where the elements would mean that the drum would the animal skin on the drum would drop or raise in pitch, and it's just an unpredictable surface. So he figured out that all these guys had this technique that would kind of overcome all of those like roadblocks, I guess. And he compiled the system and started teaching it to drum set players, and Jim was one of them. And so they called it the Moeller technique. And it's just a way of playing and using your body so that you don't hurt yourself. It's like about using the bigger muscles in your body to back up the small, like our wrists and fingers are obviously smaller muscles and tendons. And if you don't involve the arm, then you're all wrists, and that won't do too well if you're playing loud all the time. So it's about getting your arm involved and
Is
using
that is
these
that like
bigger.
carpal tunnel syndrome, something like
Yeah,
that people
carpal.
get for the repetitive motions?
Exactly. Tendonitis, carpal tunnel. I know some drummers who've had some really, nasty, awful injuries that require surgery and so on. So we're obviously trying to avoid all of that stuff. And that's what both of those guys gave me, but Jim in particular.
So outside of those three drum mentors, who would you say were your biggest drumming influences? So an example would be, let's say Ringo Starr from the Beatles, if we're going back to the beginning. What drummers like that were playing on the albums you loved growing up and you were listening to?
Yeah, Ringo for sure. Obviously, John Bonham was another huge one for me. Like right after I got into the Beatles, I got into Zeppelin, and then from there I went to Neil Peart. Um, so those were like my big three for a really long time. And then because of Neil, he did a project at the time called Burning for Buddy, which was like a tribute to Buddy Rich. And he funded the whole thing. Had all these other drummers come in and play with the Buddy Rich Big Band, and they made a couple of records like that. And so from there, I got into jazz. I got into Buddy, which was a big one because that coincided with like high school and playing in the big band, and I started to be able to understand what that was all about. And then I got into like all of these amazing jazz drummers like Tony Williams and Elvin Jones and Art Blakey and all of these people. And I studied jazz really intensely for a while, and Joe Morello, so on, because he was a jazz drummer. And then Jeff Porcaro became a really, really big one for me. And for people who don't know who he is, he was the guy he was the drummer in Toto, the band Toto, but also was like a really prolific studio drummer. He lived in LA, was born in Connecticut, but the family all moved to LA in the late 60s, I guess. And he was doing and did exactly kind of what I wanted to be doing. He toured with artists, he toured with his own band, he played on records. And for me, that was kind of what made me want to move out to LA. Another drummer like that was Vinnie Colaiuta, who played with Sting and just a bunch of that guy, Joni Mitchell. His career has been incredibly prolific. Frank Zappa, all these people that Vinny played was a similar thing. Like these guys who are sort of doing all these really cool different things to make a living playing drums. And luckily for me, when I moved out here, I studied with Jeff's dad, who was a jazz drummer as well, named Joe Porcaro, who left us a couple of years ago, who was another very important guy in my life, just as a mentor for general purposes, like somebody who made a living. He was a percussionist. He played on a lot of movie sound. I mean, his list of movie soundtrack credits is insane. It's like he was part of the group of guys that played on everything for a while. So Yeah, those are a lot of. I mean, there's so many people, man. Like I could probably go on for the rest of the time. We're talking about all the different drum. I'm a huge fan of music and of drums, and I'm still searching for stuff and people I haven't heard, because that's what keeps me passionate about it, is finding new people and finding music I haven't heard before. So
You mentioned Elvin Jones. Is that so from the Jeremy Taggart interview? Is that Elvin Jones is the one that played on some of the Our Lady Peace stuff? And
yeah,
Jeremy talked about him like that was his idol. And when I asked, what was it? I think I asked, what are you most grateful for? His huge career, diamond selling career, 5 million albums. I think his answer was that I got to spend time with and record with and hang out with my idol, Elvin Jones. So that's to show how big that is. So when you mentioned the name, I'm like, why is that so familiar? And then it came back to
yeah,
me.
legend. John, all the John Coltrane, all the really important John Coltrane recordings are with Elvin. Elvin was that. There was a quartet he had for many years, and that was Elvin, and he just had this profound impact on people from every. You hear people, metal drummers to singer songwriter drummers to, I mean, everybody cites Elvin. He's just, there was something about it that was so deep and profound that it just has an impact on everybody emotionally, I think.
I'm gonna do something on the band Tool for the podcast. So I'm a massive Tool fan.
Yeah,
I just saw they're coming to Montreal, so I'm gonna grab a ticket.
there
I
you go.
I saw them in Montreal in 2007, and then in Hamilton a few years ago. I'm gonna go again because I love those guys. Anyways, I just listened to the entire 6 album discography from Tool with good headphones on, which is a journey. And man, Danny Carey, what a monster drummer! I mean, it's
Total
so
monster.
insane.
Yeah.
Um, the first couple albums, it's almost a little more restraint on the drums, and then you can hear him starting with Anima start to let loose, and the newer albums, man, it's like he's given himself permission to just do what he does, and the songs are all now like 12 to 17 minutes, and man, Danny Carey, I don't know if you're a Tool fan, but
I
Danny
am.
Carey is so
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yeah, I am. And I think that one of the things about what you just said that strikes me is like, those kinds of bands too. It's like we're in an age where there are fewer bands now. But one of the beautiful things about bands is that as time goes on, they get to be more themselves. The individuals in the band plus the band itself sort of like grows and takes on its own life. And bands need several albums to really every band, like the Beatles, Zeppelin, all the greatest bands, they've needed this time to develop something. And I just, my hope is always that will always be, people will always be given that space to discover who they are, individually and as a band, because that's why you have that experience listening. It's like, oh yeah, by the third album he's just ripping. So yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I was just, as I was listening to an album, I was reading up to kind of, get into that time and how critics responded to the album when it came out and how the singles charted and all that stuff. So just kind of, putting it all in a bubble while I listen. And what's funny is, they're known for their changes in time signatures, their changes in tempo, changes in keys. And in one song, I forget, maybe it's Schism, but there was one song where it said it was like 27 time signature changes, and it's a hit single, like it's a legit global monster smash. And it's like, what other song, you might have Pink Floyd, Money, that's in 7/4, like something that's a
Right,
different time signature, that's like, oh, they somehow had a hit in a different time signature. But
right.
then you get this one where it's like you're trying to count and they keep switching it up on you.
It's crazy. Yeah, and like you said, it's not the most common thing to have those things become hits, but I think what happens with those bands too, and I always felt this about Rush, is like it was always an organic creation. Like the time signature thing was always born out of, hey, I've got this riff, and I guess it's in 15, or whatever it is, and then it's musical, as opposed to there are known to be certain bands who, I don't need to say who it is, but who would like literally write out like, well, let's try doing these time signatures together and see what we come up with. And to me, it never has the same impact as like something that just comes naturally to the guys that are writing the music. Like, Frank Zappa would be the most extreme example of a guy who just heard music that was in crazy time signatures and rhythms, and it was just came out of him, like a classical composer or something. And that always has, I always enjoy that stuff more. I always connect with it more.
Yeah, Frank Zappa. I listened to his greatest hits album a few years ago, and that guy's so unique. Like he's just
So
so
yeah,
unique between the music and the lyrics and the song titles and
the
the
humor and
guitar
everything.
playing. I mean,
Yeah.
man, it would have been nice to have more music from him over the years, you know.
I know. We're missing guys like him for sure.
So you mentioned moving from Toronto to LA. I spent a month in LA a few years ago, and there's celebrities everywhere. There's times where I'd be at a restaurant and I would talk to the waiter, and the waiter's always like an actor. It's like he's got to make some
Yeah.
money during the day and then go to auditions at night, or they're all your meeting musician. Everyone's creative in LA because it's a hub. Have you come across different things like that where you're playing a gig and a celebrity's there, or you get hired by a celebrity? Just any cool stories you can think of.
Yeah, the kind of the one that comes to mind is I played some gigs with Rita Wilson, who's a writer, director, actor, is the wife of Tom Hanks. And just it's she's been making music for about 10 years, I think. She's making records, and then doing some little bit of touring and just like live gigs in town and stuff like that. And so I've played with her. She has a bunch of different musicians who come in and out of the band, whoever's like available. And but I've sort of had some fun, just some fun gigs with her where it's like always somebody at her gigs. Not the least of which is her own husband.
Nice
And
supportive husband. That's good to see.
yeah, and he is he first of all, he's a big music fan, so that's kind of nice because like he immediately wants to talk to the band just because it's like a bunch of musicians and he plays guitar, and so he just sort of starts talking to the band. He wants to know who the band is. What's your name? And memorizes everybody's name quickly, and then has conversations and just is really into it. And that's been a fun one. And I've just gotten to see various people at these events. A lot of times they're like fundraisers and so on. And like the list of people is pretty lengthy, but like I can remember like shaking Kevin Nealon's hand, which was like an amazing experience because like I'm such a huge SNL fan. And he came up to the band and he's like, super tall, and he's like, great job, fellas, and shaking his hand. And then he goes out and tells a bunch of jokes and slays. And I find that like I'm not so much about like meeting a celebrity to say I've met a celebrity, but when it's somebody whose work you actually admire, it's actually really fun to shake somebody's hand like that, because it's like I got to say thank you for making me laugh when I was like 14 years old.
And there was a famous MC at that event as well, right? With
Yeah,
Rita
right. Oh, yeah,
Wilson.
right. Yeah, Billy Crystal was the MC, and that was cool for me too, because like my dad was such a huge Billy Crystal fan and got me into Billy Crystal, and then I met him, and I could call my dad and say, hey, guess what? Guess whose hand I shook. Same with Marty Short as well. Same thing. He came to another gig we did and was like, that guy, like when he walks into a room, he's just immediately on and starts like telling all these jokes and improvising stuff with like people he's never met before. And it's just like, kind of like, oh yeah, now I see why this guy is like, he's like a magnet. Everybody wants to be around him and he's super funny. And
It's so funny you mentioned your dad when it came to Billy Crystal, because I when you mentioned Billy Crystal, I started thinking of my dad, because my sister and I kept renting really horrible movies. And my dad said, if you guys rent one more horrible movie, I'm going to pick one for you. And sure enough, we rent a horrible movie. So my dad goes, okay, I'm picking next. And he got City Slickers
yeah,
and with
I
Billy
love that one.
Crystal. Yeah. And he made us watch it. So I have like a memory of Billy Crystal with my dad too. So it's so funny that that's where you went as well.
Man, I mean, that was, I think, it seems like you and I are pretty close in age. I think that was like just, we grew up in a golden age for comedy for sure. Like all these people were at their peak in that era. It's just amazing.
You also had a church gig that had a surprising guest as
Oh
well.
yeah, yeah. So I did this one off, like in LA. There's a lot of gigs like that. Like there's just a lot of live music at church gigs and stuff like that. And a friend of mine was a bass player at this one, and he called me and said, "Hey, come do this gig." I said, "Okay, cool." So I drove out there, and he didn't tell me in advance. And I get there, and the leader of the band leader is Tom Wilson, who was Biff Tannen from the Back to the Future movies. And again, like a guy who made me laugh so much through the years. And I didn't say anything to him because I think he wanted this thing to be sort of a separate, he just didn't like, there's a funny video if you look it up of him playing a guitar, and he wrote the lyrics. It's really hilarious, talking about all the different questions he gets about Back to the Future still now. And he answers them all in this like 2-minute song. And it'll make you laugh because it's like everything that, all the silly questions that people ask him. So I didn't like get into it with him, but it was just cool to be around him and see how nice a guy he was, and an excellent musician and singer, by the way. So it's just like these people are all like so talented that it's mind blowing. They can do it all. So I love that. That's a lesson I got. I mean, the music business here is very much in service of the television and music industry, right? So they come together a lot, and I think there's definitely these threads in there. Like, you see this excellence of the people who are performing, who you're backing up. And even though you don't do what they do, you still admire their ability to kind of jump into some world that they're not involved in normally as well. Like all of a sudden, someone's got a guitar and they're singing. It's like, wow, this person is like super talented. And you just learn about, always giving your best and always being prepared, and being a nice person. Most people hopefully are nice people, and that goes a long way.
So while researching your career, there's 4 artists I came across that are very well known, have sold millions of albums. I'd like to dive into, some deep questions about those 4, if that's okay with you.
I love that.
Starting with Lisa Loeb. So
Yeah.
Lisa Loeb, this goes back to about 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
This is just one session. Can you share that? And then I have some Lisa Loeb questions here.
Okay. Modern session, like example A almost, right? Because it's like, this friend of mine is a producer, and he's working with her, and he calls me one day and says, "Hey, he didn't say who it was. He's like, I've got a song, I want you to play on. Can I come to your studio?" Because he knew I had my setup. This is pre-pandemic, obviously. So, there could have been an option to do it somewhere else or with her or whatever, but he just was like, "No, let's do this. Like everything else is done already. Let's get your drums on this." And so he came over, and when he got there, he told me who it was for. And I was like, "Oh wow, this is super cool," and I think it was literally just one song, and she was making a children's record at the time. And what was really cool about that was like we finished the song. I didn't hear about it for a while, and then it came out, and then it got nominated for a Grammy. And I'm like, and he sends me a message one day. I'm like, "You're kidding me, really? Like we got nominated?" And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "This is incredible!" Like. And then she won. And I was like, okay, so this is kind of trippy, because like one session I did for 3 hours or whatever it was in my studio one day ends up being on a record that won a Grammy, which is really cool. And on top of that, she was so kind that she bought everybody, because you have to pay for these things that say, Matt Starr participated in the Grammy winning recording of whatever. Anybody who is on a record like that is entitled to order one of those from the Grammy Foundation or whatever. But she like went ahead and ordered one for everybody and then sent it as a gift, which is like super nice. And I need to frame that thing, but I haven't yet. So it was just like an all around really cool experience. And I remember like I posted about it online after it happened, and she like chimed in and said, "Thank you." She's like, with gratitude, like, "Thank you so much for playing on this." I'm like, "Thank you so much for having me on it." So she couldn't have been cooler, even though I've never met her in person. And that is kind of like I guess not that unusual of an experience. Sometimes the artist just isn't there. They never are there, and they just sign off on it later, and you never meet them. And I haven't met her. I'd love to play with her sometime, and because I always loved her work, So yeah, that's that story. Interesting one.
That's so cool. You can say that your studio where you record drums has produced a Grammy Award winning
Yes.
song from a
Yeah.
Grammy Award winning album. So I went and I listened to the song you played on.
Uh-huh.
That's not just a great kid song, that's a great song, period.
It's a cool song, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's cool, man. I remember them saying they wanted it to have like a bit of a Beatles-ish sort of flavor to it. That's the one thing I remember about the session itself. And I thought it turned out really cool. And the guy who, I should mention, the producer, his name is Rich Jacques, Jacques. And he's a great songwriter and producer in his own right, and he's been working with Lisa for a long time. And so yeah, thanks to him for involving me in that. It was really cool.
So what's cool is Rich Jacques came up in an interview not long ago because
No way.
he worked with Peter Katz, who was a guest on the interview. So I actually reached out to him to say, "Hey, Peter said some nice things about you," and he responded. So it's
That's
so
so
cool
cool.
to see how everyone, the music industry, right?
Isn't that
Everyone's
amazing?
connected. Yeah.
Yeah. Small world, man. Amazing.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say that song. So even though it's considered a children's song, and it's because the lyrics are kind of catered towards how, someone that's coming into their own might feel like it's
Yeah.
relatable lyrically to a younger demographic, but it doesn't sound like a kid song where there's like certain kid sounding instruments and all that. It just sounds like a great pop song, and the lyrics
Yeah.
happen to be, for a younger demographic. I just
Yeah,
wanted
it's
to
kind
throw
of
that
cool.
out there.
I wonder if that was her intention, because you're right, it absolutely comes across that way. It's almost like you could listen to it as an adult and still get something out of it, which is great.
So I want to share. I was doing a little bit of research on Lisa Loeb. So I remember like when she got big back in the day, she had 2 or 3 massive singles and 2 gold albums and all that stuff. But I
Yeah.
love to do the deep dive stuff, so I actually know what I'm talking about. And her story is insane. So maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but for our audience that might find this interesting. So her big break is she lived in New York City, and her neighbor across the way was Ethan Hawke, the big actor. And so she meets this guy as a neighbor, and she's a musician. So she starts writing music for Ethan Hawke's plays. And then she passed him a recording of the song Stay, I Missed You, which became a
Big
number
hit.
one hit. She
Yeah.
just passed him a recording. He was working on the movie Reality Bites, and he gives it to Ben Stiller. Ben Stiller loves it and plays it over the ending credits of this hit movie. And then they decide to put it on the soundtrack. And that song becomes a number one hit. And even to this day, she's the only artist ever in human history to have a number one song on the Billboard Hot 100 in the US with no record deal.
That's
So
crazy.
so it's hard enough, it's hard enough to have a number one single on a major label. Then it's one thing, it's very infrequently do you get a number one single on an independent label. You just don't have the marketing dollars to push out a number one. And then
Right.
one level below that is only her. So she wasn't on a major. She wasn't even on an independent label. She was just one person in an apartment that gave a demo to somebody and has a number one single that led to a massive career after that. So I
That's
thought people would
incredible.
find that interesting.
Yeah, it makes me think of like the music business being what it is. It's like literally one encounter, one meeting, one phone call can change your life, and it's not meant to be like a pipe dream kind of thing or something like that, or give people false hope. It's just that's the truth. Like you never know when one phone call is going to come in that is an instant game changer for you. And it's one thing I love about the business, because it really is such a tricky business, like emotionally, mentally, to deal with every day. Because there can be these long stretches where there's stuff just, it's like status quo for a while. And then all of a sudden something happens and you're like, oh, so I find myself like in a different city or whatever. And I find that fascinating. And I think that that's a really great example of it. I know a friend of mine, this is way back in the day. And I forget which of the hit songs it was, but it was for the artist Tiffany, who had like a bunch of
That was
pop
a
hits. And
pop. Yeah. It was,
yeah,
sorry, back in the day, I remember it was like Alanis and Tiffany. Back when
yeah,
Alanis was just the first name. out of Ottawa, you know, a teenager had, you know, just as Alanis had pop hits, it was her and Tiffany were like the two very young
That's
pop
right.
superstars. My sister was a big fan. That's how I know that.
Right
That's the
before
only reason I
Alanis.
know that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great because it's before Alanis kind of went like in that other like the rock
Before
direction. And
Jagged Little Pill, it was
yeah, that's
Alanis,
amazing.
no Morissette attached, and
Just Alanis, yeah.
yeah, she did a hard shift. Sorry, you can continue with
No,
your
no, no, no.
story.
So oh yeah, so
It was with
anyway,
Tiffany.
so my friend was she was playing at a club in Hollywood somewhere, just some like, restaurant or club gig, solo piano and singing. And she was singing one of the two. Tiffany had like two ballad hits, and it was one of the two ballads, and I forget what the name of it now. I could look it up in a second, but she's singing this song at this gig of hers, her own original song, and in happens to walk the guy that's producing Tiffany's record at the time. She hasn't like hit yet, and he just hears that song. And he's like, "I dig this song." So he approaches her and says, "Hey, I got this artist I'm working with. I think this song would be a great fit for her." And again, like life changer, because like she bought a house with the money that she made from co-writing that. So I think she finished the song with another person, so it was a co-write. And but yeah, she like made a lot of money just from that one gig that she did, where the guy walked in and the timing was just great and game changer, And it's just how our business is. It's kind of crazy, like because that might never happen to somebody, but it could happen. And I think that's what is kind of crazy and beautiful about the business and what we do.
Yeah, there's luck, but it's also putting yourself in a place where luck can happen. So
Yeah.
that musician got lucky in that moment, but she only got lucky because she had developed her craft, had written a great song, was out there performing, and somebody saw the talent that she had developed, and it went from there. So
You nailed it. That's exactly right. Got to be in the right place at the right time. A little bit of luck and a lot of talent and a lot of hard work. Yeah.
and you have to stick around long enough for that success to present itself.
You have to stick around because it's easy to go, I'm out. I gotta bail on this. But yeah, if you stick around, things tend to happen.
So two more points to finish off how ridiculous the Lisa Loeb story is with that single. So, I already mentioned she gets the demo to Ethan Hawke, gets it to Ben Stiller, becomes a number one hit while she's completely unsigned. From there, the album goes gold, and then the song gets nominated for a Grammy. So she was nominated for a Grammy for Best Pop Performance by a Group. So number one
Amazing.
song, gold album, and a Grammy nomination off of a demo handed to Ethan Hawke. So wild.
Fantastic.
I love
Fantastic.
it. Last thing about Lisa Loeb, and then we'll shift over to someone else you've performed with. You've mentioned Frank Zappa several times in this interview.
Yeah.
Do you know that Lisa Loeb is married to Frank Zappa's son, Dweezil Zappa?
You know what? I knew that somewhere in the back of my mind. You just reminded me of it. That's amazing.
Just again, it's all these things tying back together, which is the fun part of the deep dives. Is you start connecting all these dots, the further you go down the rabbit hole.
I love that. I love that.
So up next, let's talk about you performing with Chris Shiflett, who's the guitarist for Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
How does this come to be? I mean, he's in one of the biggest bands in the world.
Yeah.
You can take this away wherever you want to
Okay.
go with it.
A friend of mine, again, you already said it. Your connections and your friends are almost always the ways into these things. And a buddy of mine is a studio operator, great drummer, great producer, great engineer. His name is Luke Adams. He's a drummer in town, and he had done a tour with Chris. Chris's music, if people haven't heard it, is definitely not like the Foo Fighters. It's like he's California born and a huge fan of country and Americana music, and so his music is very much in line with that, his solo music. And so Luke had been playing with him, and he was getting a little too busy at his studio to go out and do the next tour. So he called me and said, "Are you into doing this?" And of course I said yes, very much so. And then I met, I kind of had a phone conversation with Chris, and then learned a bunch of music and showed up. It was kind of like not really an audition, but sort of an audition, like there's that thing where when you get recommended, even though it's not like a bunch of people coming in the room and playing, it's like you're still a bit on the hot seat because it's like if they don't like me, then now's the time to make the change, right? So, but he liked me, luckily, and we like got along and had a good conversation and played some music, and then he just asked me if I wanted to go on tour, and so we did a fair amount of touring over. It was mainly through 1 year, like it was 2019 where we did most of it, and it was like a bunch of dates in the U.S. Supporting a band called Blackberry Smoke, who are like a really big Americana, kind of like Allman Brothers type band. Some solo gigs, and then we went over to Europe and the UK and did a bunch of dates over there as well. And it was like a really great experience because Chris is such a strong guitar player, such a really it just um, it's like one thing I figured out a long time ago was I want to be around people who do these things on a certain level, because what happens is you absorb some of that, like just by being around them, by playing with them. And so I always feel like when I played with Chris, there was a certain thing that I connected with him on in terms of like just strength and power. And even though I wasn't playing super loud with him, like I wasn't playing like Taylor does or something, he wanted somebody that had, say, a different kind of touch, which is exactly fit perfectly with me. Like I play a certain volume, but I'm not a basher or something like that. And not that Taylor was, he had a touch as well, but like it's just a different kind of thing. And and Chris just kind of like, I learned so much about just being in the moment playing with him, because he wanted everything to feel spontaneous. And even though we were he didn't even call it rehearsal. He just called, let's get together and jam, because he comes from the band perspective. And I don't. I come from a freelancer perspective. I come from like being hired to work with people and learning their music and showing up and rehearsing and then going out and playing. And Chris was like, let's get together, let's jam, let's like hang out together, and then we'll go play some music. And I learned a lot about that side of things from him. And it was just a great experience. I loved playing with him. I hope I get to do more at some point.
So him referring to it as let's get together and jam. There's the jam in the van sessions. Can you
Yeah,
share what that is with our listeners?
yeah. Jam in the Van is really cool. It's I think it's still going on. It's like literally a giant van with a recording facility for video and audio built into it, and a little like backline thing with like a drum set and an amp and a couple amps or whatever and microphones. And they park themselves somewhere. In our case, it was like downtown LA somewhere, like in the Arts District. And you show up and you go in and you set up behind this back line and you play like 3 or 4 songs, and they record it, and then they put it out on YouTube. And it's really like super well done. Like the audio's great and the video's great, and super fun, man. Super fun experience. And then you pile out and another band piles in, and they just do it all day. And so we did that. That was actually like the last thing I did with him before was doing some other Foo Fighter stuff, and I got busy, and then so we haven't played together since then. But man, that was a fun experience too, to kind of cap off what we'd already done. So yeah.
So when you think of Chris Shiflett, you think Foo Fighters, and I mean that you would think that that's impressive enough. I mean, it's one of the biggest bands. He's been with them since after the third or fourth album, and they've put out, I don't know, 12 albums now. But
Yeah.
diving into his history, he was in 2 other successful bands. He was in No Use for a Name. He was in Me First and the Gimme Gimmes.
Yeah.
And then when I saw you were performing with him, I'm like, oh, he must have some solo stuff. I look, he has 5 solo albums. Like
Yeah.
it's crazy. Like where does this come from when there's already, say, 12 Foo Fighter albums? How do you then on the side have 5 solo albums?
That's a really good question. I don't know how he does it, because he also has 2 kids. He's a guy that just has so much going on all the time. And he also has he has his own podcast, which you probably noticed. Again, I think a guy like Chris is just like, one thing I can say for sure about him is that he's another person who I put in the camp of like just really loves music. And so I think like he does everything he can to be around as many people and involved in as many situations musically as he can. And I think that's the explanation. He just wants to keep. And I think his solo project is like that's the Foo Fighters are obviously the band that he's in, and he loves being in that band. And I feel like the solo project is like really truly straight from his heart and his a representation of who he is, because the Foo Fighters is really that's Dave's band, that's Dave's vision, that's Dave's music. And obviously everybody's involved in the creation of that, but I think Chris gets to really be himself in his own project.
Yeah, when you have a band as big and beloved as the Foo Fighters, there is kind of a box you have to play within as far as like expectations and what actually works for that band. So for him, it's like maybe he has some great songs and they just wouldn't fit with the Foo Fighters mold anyways, right? So
Right,
you need
exactly.
another avenue for that.
Yeah, exactly. You need another outlet, and he, to full credit to him for being in one of the biggest, or probably the biggest rock band in the world, and then also having a solo career somehow, which is it's a great point that you made. It's a pretty stunning feat.
So I saw the Foo Fighters back in 2000. They were playing in Ottawa at the Summer Salt Festival, which was Our Lady Peace created this festival and went across Canada.
Right.
And so I saw them all the way back in 2000. And then I'm going to be seeing them next month. They're one of the headliners at Blues Fest again in Ottawa. So I'll be seeing them with their new drummer, Josh Freese. I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts as him being the choice to move forward? So it hasn't been announced that he's like officially their drummer and he'll be on future albums and stuff. He's at least in there now for all the big festivals and tours that are happening. What
Right.
are your thoughts? It seems like everyone's pretty happy with that choice.
So happy. I mean, I watched what did they call it?
The reveal?
Yeah, what did they had he had a funny name for the little kind of concert that they recorded, the rehearsal they recorded, preparing for music concerts or something. It was really funny. I was blown away. Like I was already a huge fan of Josh. He's just a guy that again has done so many varied things and kills all of it, just destroys it like in the best way possible. And I was still somehow blown away and impressed even more than I thought I would be by him in the Foo Fighters. Like I watched that thing through and I was just like, I can't. I mean, it's beautiful. It sounds great. It's a whole other thing. I think it's pretty different. I think in any situation like that, there's going to be an emotional adjustment, a playing adjustment for everybody else in the band. But it just seems like he's like, the right fit as a person too. Like they're kind of, as my dad would say, kibitzing back and forth and making jokes with each other and having a good time. And Dave and Taylor were best friends as well. So I think those are hard shoes to fill. But I think Josh is just an incredible musician. I have so much admiration for what he's doing, and the fact that he's also played with Sting and Devo and
A Perfect
Suicidal
Circle.
Tendencies, Perfect Circle. Yeah, like when
Wasn't
I
he with
first looked
Nine
at,
Inch Nails as
and
well?
with
He's
Nine
been
Inch
with like
Nails, oh
everybody.
man, there's this like drummer cam footage of him with Nine Inch Nails that's on YouTube that I've watched like a million times, just because it's just like the perfect example of somebody who is so in it, and that music is so intense, and somehow he's just like sailing through it. It's like butter. It's amazing. Same with the Foo Fighters. So yeah,
Yeah,
I love it.
Nine Inch Nails is the best concert I've ever seen in my life. And all I do is go to concerts. Literally, like once a week, I'm at a concert. I have
I love
like
it.
30 concerts coming up. I have tickets to. And this was way back in the day. There was a triple bill. So there was Death from Above 1979, opening
Yeah.
for Queens of the Stone Age, opening for Nine Inch Nails. And I was going because I was a Queens of the Stone Age fan. So it's,
Yeah.
I knew of Nine Inch Nails. It's like one of those bands I never got into, but I respect. Trent Reznor's a genius. So I went there for Queens of the Stone Age, and then it's awesome that I'll be able to see Nine Inch Nails as well. So I was there not as a fan, and not as a fan, it was by far the best thing I've ever seen in my life, and I've been a huge fan since then. The lighting was incredible, the music, the songs, the intensity. You could feel the hand of genius on everything that was happening. The way the stage would like it's a massive stage in an arena in Montreal. I think it was the Bell Center. And suddenly they're doing, Hurt or something like one of the ballads, and the whole stage collapses like inwards this way and downwards this way into like a little box.
Whoa.
And suddenly it's this, instead of a big arena thing, it's this one intimate little room that you're looking into, and there's a screen that they're doing a projector onto. So you're watching a, this film being projected onto a screen that is all this like haunting stuff. And then there's a spotlight. So while you're watching the film, you can see through the screen and you can see Trent Reznor alone at a piano playing and singing Hurt. Like just everything was genius. And I've gone, I saw them in Philadelphia after that, but just seeing Nine Inch Nails once made me a lifelong fan.
Man, that's amazing. That's really beautiful. Yeah, he seems like he's just all about art, in every sense of the word.
Yeah, and then he
And
goes on to score all these movies and win all these Oscars. Like he's the number one guy scoring movies now. It's insane.
it's
Like
crazy.
how can one man be blessed with so much talent? I mean, it's just not fair.
There's just those, yeah, those people. It's like I am always in awe of those kinds of people, and it gives you something to strive for, to be your best. Like look at these people; they never stop, and everything everything is just from a pure art standpoint. They're always trying to create, but not necessarily in a sense of like I want to make a lot of money, although they do, but it's more like I want to create something that has an impact on people and affects them emotionally, and that to me is everything. So yeah, I totally agree.
So after your time with Chris in 2019, this global pandemic hits and it decimated most industries. And I would say the music industry and especially the live event industry got wiped out more than almost any other industry. How did that affect you and your career? And then how did you adapt to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to be frank, I was like probably most people, I was a little bit terrified of the whole situation, like not just from a health perspective, but like you said, what it was doing to the industry and the business. We basically all of us were out of work to a large degree, and suddenly, obviously, like it didn't just we didn't get any warning. It just happened, right? And So I think what I how I just started to get through it emotionally was I still had my studio set up. So I spent a crazy amount of time in there to save myself from the insanity of like being at home constantly, because it was another place I could go where there was like hardly anybody around. I wouldn't really run into anybody. And especially once I was in my room, and unless I let somebody in, nobody's gonna come in, right? So I was in there, and what happened was I started getting really, I had already done the engineering thing on my own for quite a while, but I started really going even deeper than I had. And I got like, it's almost like the first 10 years or so that I had all this equipment, I got to a certain level. And then in that first year of the pandemic, I doubled that skill set or something, or the intensity of the amount of time I spent made me twice as good as I had been before, just because I turned all my attention to it. And so I really dedicated myself to that. And I think it also kept me in the loop, so to speak. Like people were calling me to play on stuff because that was all that was available at the time for work. And also it just like I was, posting the stuff because I wanted to show my work, so to speak. And I posted some things, and I think it just kept me in people's mind, you know. And that actually ties in with, I think you're going to ask me about Buffy St. Marie, and it ties in with that because that opportunity came along like it was like the middle of 2021. So obviously, this is like shortly, what is it, like a few months after everybody started to get vaccinated and things were starting to happen again. And I remember distinctly sitting like where I am right now. I had recorded something for somebody, and I was like I was going to be doing some editing and some mixing of stuff before I sent it off. And all of a sudden my phone started pinging and blowing up, and it was from two different people. It was from a drummer friend of mine. No, correction, two different drummer friends of mine who somehow had gotten the call, both of them from Buffy's guitar player, who's her musical director. His name is Anthony King, who's now a very good friend. And they had both independently mentioned me. And I'm not sure if that was just like a coincidence or whatever, but they both mentioned me. So he immediately was like, okay, well, I'm hearing this guy's name from two different people, so I'll just call him first. Or I called him, or I don't remember how it happened, but it was like, I was getting messages like, call Anthony, there's a gig, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know who called who, but we talked to each other. And I won't get into details on this because it's a little bit, it's an intense situation, but they had to move on from their drummer like very suddenly, right? So they had showed up to Reno, which is where they had a festival gig, and they had started to rehearse. They had a day of rehearsal, and then something happened, and they had to move on and make a change really quickly. So they were looking for somebody to fly in that same day and show up and do a rehearsal with her, like a short one, and then the festival was the next day. So, I just was like kind of terrified in a way, but I was like, okay, I've done this kind of thing before, maybe not like jumping on a plane to do it, but I've definitely done like the last minute fill-in thing. So I should just trust myself and do this. And I wasn't going to say no. So yeah, I said yes. And I was suddenly like in an Uber on the way to the airport, like scratching out like little cheat sheets for myself, and continued that on the plane because it's like a 1 hour flight or an hour and a half flight to Reno from LA. So I didn't have like that much time. And then I showed up and they drove me right to her tour manager drove me right to the rehearsal place, and I met her and kind of scrambled a bunch of stuff together, and we played through the songs, and it went pretty good. And then the next day we did the gig, and the crazy thing was she had some sort of health stuff come up for her that day, and like we didn't see her all day. We didn't even do a sound check because she was dealing with some stuff. And then she shows up to the gig, and the gig went really well. And then she asked me back, and we just started doing gigs after that. And luckily for me, like I'd never played Massey Hall before. And my first time playing Massey Hall was with her, which was like a huge honor for me, just because like she's an artist that I consider to be like, one of the early people who, did concerts in that room in the first place. And then it happened to be like when they were reopening it, right? So they had Gordon Lightfoot in there for 2 nights or 3 nights, and then we were right afterwards. And I was just like, man, this is like beautifully like tied in with my life and the fact that I'm Canadian, and here I am playing in like a really important hall in my own city. And it was a great moment, really great moment. And she is
She's a legend.
she's a legend, and she has so much wisdom, and her music is so important, and so she has so many important things to say, and her causes, and it's just being around somebody like that is like, having somebody sprinkle pixie dust on you or something. It's just like a magical thing. And I've always wanted that. I want as much of that kind of stuff as I can get, is like, put me around these people, because I want to absorb that. It's like the people I studied with. It's the same thing. I'm going to learn a lot, and it's going to inform my art. And so it's been an amazing experience. And then, we did this tribute thing with her last year on CBC. They did a concert. We did a concert in Ottawa at the oh man, forgetting the name of the hall. This beautiful,
Probably the NAC.
the
National
NEC.
Arts
Thank
Center.
you. Yes, exactly. So we did a show there, and it was with a bunch of really great Indigenous artists mostly. And the band backed them up, and then she came on and did a few songs, and it was kind of like a life tribute to Buffy while she's still on the planet, which is beautiful. And then she said, we did one gig after that, and then she said, guys, I'm real tired. I think I need to take some time off. I'm not sure if I want to tour anymore, et cetera, et cetera. And we weren't expecting anything. And then a really nice surprise was like to hear from her management shortly ago that they want to do some gigs this year. And so she's coming back out of sort of her retirement rest thing, and we're doing some gigs, which is amazing. She still wants to play. So
She's 82 and still crushing it.
amazing, right? Like
Yeah.
really. And you wouldn't know it when you see her move around. It's like that this person's not 82. That's not possible. She's just like she's got all this energy and you know, passion and she's just a great person to be around. Lots of wisdom, lots of fun stories. Lots. She's been around everybody. She's seen everything. You know, I've even gotten to ask her about like some of my favorite studio drummers who played on some of her records back in the day, and what was it like playing with this person and that person. It's just fantastic, man. I love that kind of
Man,
stuff.
she was a part of the like golden age of singer-songwriters in Canada. She was a part of the scene with the Joni Mitchells and the Leonard Cohens and the Neil Youngs. That was her crew that she came up with. And you know, her songs have been recorded by Elvis Presley, Janis Joplin, Joe Cocker. She has 17 albums. Like for you coming in, like where do you even start learning the discography when there's 17 albums, you know?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, she's doing like a lot of artists, I guess. Like she touches on some of her older material, but leans towards the stuff that has been on her last few records, where she like is really kind of on the front edge of like incorporating, you know, loops and electronics and you know, more modern sounds into her thing. And so it's been amazing. But yeah, like every gig she'll like pull some old song out of the trick bag and go, okay, let's play this one, and then I learn a new old Buffy song. Um, and you just mentioned like Joni and Neil, and when I started making the connections of you know, like there's a Buffy biography thing on YouTube where they interview Joni, and she's just like, yeah, Buffy's just like one of the greatest songwriters I've ever been around, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, you know, Joni doesn't really say that about very many people, but I was like, wow, this is heavy. Like one of my heroes, because Joni and Neil are two of my biggest heroes, like is actually saying this about this person who I'm getting the chance to play with. So it's just been a pinch me thing the whole time. You know, I get where I am. I'm always aware of that, and that I'm try to remind myself of that all the time. Like this is like a privilege. Every gig is a privilege with her. So
So one final thing about Buffy, and we'll move on to Sarah McLachlan as we wrap
yeah,
up the interview here. Man, to show how groundbreaking Buffy is, she was the first Indigenous person ever to win an Academy Award. So she had a song on a soundtrack,
beautiful. Yeah.
and yeah, just to show like what's possible, and that's so wild. So let's. It's funny, we're an hour and 56 minutes in, and we're now touching on Sarah McLachlan, who's like
Let's
one
do
of the
it.
biggest artists of all time. So how did that opportunity present itself? So both Buffy and Sarah McLachlan come during the pandemic. So yeah, there was a lot of, you know, negative things that happened, but for you, it's like some beautiful things came out of that.
Yeah, I'm still sort of in awe of that happening too. I'm really grateful and can't believe it. Yeah, so the thing with Sarah came along. So this was actually just last year. I there's I'm going to shout out a friend, a guy named Victor Indrizzo, who's just one of my favorite people in the world, and one of my favorite drummers in the world as well. He plays with Alanis. He's in Alanis's band. And I've known him for quite a while now, and he's always been really generous in terms of like his advice and help. And he's like one of my go-to guys as far as like, you know, when he's further down the road than me, and I like to call and ask for help and advice. Like, what do I do? You know, should I do this? Should I do that? Whatever. So we're already close, and he just texts me one day, and it's like I'm reading it on my phone, like, what? Because the text was, I just recommended you for the Sarah McLachlan gig, and I'm like, first I like read it a couple of times, like, really? Okay,
Is there
cool.
is there a typo here? You know?
Yeah, it's like, really? But I knew it was real just because I know that like those two bands, like the Sarah and Alanis bands, like kind of there are musicians that kind of circle or go in and out of both bands.
So sorry, real quick.
Yeah,
I mentioned last year I was at Blues Fest every day. So I'm there for like 12 days.
yeah.
And two of the headliners, one day was Alanis, and like 2 days later was Sarah
With
McLachlan.
Sarah, yeah.
Again, to show you that they do kind of work in the same circuit. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
they
Continue.
show up in the same places. In fact, they played at Budweiser stage after us last year in the summer or whatever, which is another important moment for me being on that stage, which I can get into in a second. But yeah, I mean, so Victor recommended me, and then I heard from her musical director, who's a guy named Vincent Jones, who's been playing with her for like they've known. Vincent was in the Grapes of Wrath. He's an original member of the Grapes of Wrath, so he's a big part of like Canadian music history in general. And he's been in Sarah's band since I guess Sarah opened for the Grapes like in the late 80s or something like that. And that's when they first met. And then they stayed in touch and Vince started playing with her in like the mid 90s or so. And was like along for the ride when it just like blew up and got huge. So he's been there for all of that. And so, yeah, he called me and said, hey, so we have a couple of gigs, festival things. And I had, like quite a while to learn the music, which I was really grateful for. And they gave me a whole bunch of material and made it so that it was easy for me to prepare, which is beautiful. And believe it or not, that doesn't always happen. Again, so I showed up. My first gig was like a sound check, like a long sound check, but a sound check and the gig. And, Luke, Melissa, Luke, Vince, Sarah, and myself, and they all had
And her
played
gigs
together.
aren't small, so it's not.
No, yeah. And they'd played together for years. And so they all know the stuff. So I knew that all I had to do is just like be super, super prepared and it should all be okay. And again, I always tell people like it looks like, when you see people doing stuff like that, it looks like it's easy or it's that thing of like, oh, you make it look easy or something. But I worked so hard to be prepared for that. And I tell people that all the time. Like, I didn't just show up and play the gig. Like it took me, I wanted to get inside the material so that when I showed up, it felt like I was inside the material as opposed to just knowing it. Um, so yeah, and it's been a crazy ride. Like, just again, like one of the big highlights being playing at Budweiser Stage, which I went to, which was called Molson Amphitheater when I was growing up, I guess. And I saw so many concerts there, and so to be on that stage myself with her of all people, and also the Ottawa gig, which you saw, was a big one for me too, because it's just like, okay, I'm in my home country's nation's capital, and I'm playing with probably the biggest female artist or among the top couple of female artists of that entire country's history. And here I am, and I'm just finding myself in these pinch me moments, and it's not lost on me that that's happening, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's really incredible. So yeah.
Yeah, and she's that show, she's one of the headliners at one of Canada's biggest festivals. The attendance was probably 30 to 40,000 people. Like
Yeah,
what
wow,
is
I
it
didn't think
like
of that.
performing to that size? Do you remember anything from that night?
Oh yeah, exhilarating.
Could
I
you
mean
see
that.
me waving?
Yeah, of
I
course.
was in
Yeah.
the mosh pit. No, I was off on the side near the fence. Yeah.
Yeah, my mom and brother drove there. I mean, it was another great moment, and yeah, those kinds of things. At this point in my life, I'm happy to say I find them more exhilarating than nerve wracking. When I was younger, I used to get a lot more nervous for those kinds of gigs, and my hands would be a little bit tight, and it would take me a couple of songs to kind of really loosen up. But now there's nerves, but it's more like a rush. It's like, oh my goodness, like what an experience this is. Like I try to soak it in and be present because it's supposed to be enjoyable and fun, and luckily that's happening for me. But I have to say that one thing I learned, or was reinforced at least for me from playing with her, is that partly because of her. She's so zen and relaxed and present and not hung up on stupid stuff that sometimes people get hung up on, that it just makes the experience like she corrals the band, like I'm the drummer and the drummer drives the bus and that's our typical role, but she kind of does this with everybody at every show. And that's just she does that in a way that I don't think I've experienced pretty much, not to that level with anybody else.
She
So it's
seems
pretty
very like Canadian, down to earth, like just
the
a
coolest.
regular person that's very talented, that's achieved a tremendous amount of success.
Kind of unique that way too. Most people like on her level are I I shouldn't I don't want to be like, you know, mean about it or something, but there's a lot of narcissism in the business and a lot of people who, you get to meet them and they talk a lot about themselves. They're not nice people. They are, but but Sarah's one of those people that like will want to talk to you about you too. It's like there's this thing of like you're just talking to another, like a friend. And
Yeah, you
you know,
mentioned, not a lot of people have reached her level. And I want to take a moment for our young listeners. So we have, some 16-year-old musicians and 19-year-olds and 21-year-olds that were not of age at the time where Sarah McLachlan was literally the biggest artist in the world. So I want to take a moment to educate them on just how big she was.
yeah.
So when she had several albums in a row that were monster albums, but the pinnacle would be Surfacing. So Surfacing comes out and it goes diamond in Canada, which is 10 times platinum. There's only a handful. You have like a Shania Twain album, you have Alanis Jagged Little Pill. There's very few albums that go diamond.
Wow.
So that album goes diamond in Canada, 8 times platinum in the US, so 8 million sold. She's sold over 40 million albums, making her one of the best-selling artists in human history, not just Canada. She's okay. I have a couple of things here. She's been nominated for 14 Grammys, winning 3 of them. Like, you're lucky if you ever get nominated for a Grammy. She's been nominated for 14. She's been nominated for 27 Junos and has won 10 of them, which is like a huge percentage of the nominations. Yeah. So for our younger listeners, now go listen to Sarah McLachlan. She's written some of the greatest music ever written. And building that massive picture, my question to you is, you coming into all of that history, is there a part of you that is nervous with all that success you're walking into as the new person, or are you more excited knowing you're the right person for the job?
Definitely more excited on the hunch that I'd be the right person, not knowing, because you don't know till you're there. There's human chemistry that needs to be figured out and all that stuff. So my hunch was I was, going to be right for it. So I was more excited than nervous. But yeah, of course, in the back of my head, it's like, well, this is a big one to step into. And I just tried to, because I think I was told up front, like, while you're figuring this stuff out, while you're learning the music, it's okay to be yourself and make it your own, because she's open to that. So I lean into that, like I found my own ways of playing the stuff while still honoring what the parts were and the songs were. And again, fortunately for me, it worked because there was just something about the chemistry that she liked. And of course I was really happy to be there. So I think that's an interesting, like, that's a part of the music business that isn't talked about that much, but there's a lot of chemistry that's involved. And what's beautiful about her is she really does want people to be themselves. She wants you to play who you are. She doesn't ask people to do things that the former drummer did or anything like that. She just doesn't do that. It's like, in fact, if anything, she'd be like, take some chances, be yourself, do what you think is good, take some liberties, and that's a true artist, to really allow people to be themselves in the context of their music. It's also rare, actually, and I'm very, very glad and fortunate to be there for that reason, among others.
So the first time I saw Sarah McLachlan, this is in 2009, and in Ottawa for Canada Day, they always have a free concert, and there's hundreds of thousands of people that come out to Parliament, and that's where the concert is. So in 2009, Sarah McLachlan was headlining. I went down there, and she played to 350,000 people. If I remember correctly, Woodstock, the original, I think that was like 300,000 people, to show how big. So picture Woodstock. And then this Sarah McLachlan concert was bigger than that. So I just wanted to put that out there in the ether. And then I have a confession. I have a Sarah McLachlan confession. Are you ready for this, Matt?
Yeah, come on, let's go. Yeah.
In 2003, I moved to London, Ontario to study audio engineering, which you can appreciate.
That's amazing.
And I have this distinct memory. 2003, I go to the train station in London, Ontario to take a train to head back to Ottawa for probably Christmas. And I have my CD Walkman because there's no iPods back then. And I went out and I purchased Sarah McLachlan's Afterglow album from 2003 to
Yeah,
listen to. And my favorite song on that album is World on Fire,
great
which
song.
is one of your favorite songs
Yes,
because
it
there is
is.
a drum cam video that you posted on your social media and you posted the entire song because you love that song so much.
Yeah.
Why do you love that song so much? I know why I love it. I want to know why you love it.
Well, okay, so from a strictly from a drum perspective, it's fun to play. It's just got a thing in it that just feels really good in the hands, and it just I enjoyed that particular kind of groove from a drummer's perspective. But I mean, obviously the whole song and its message is just like I think really it's funny, like a bunch of her songs are really poignant for all different periods of time, but like a bunch of them are especially important like now again or something. And yeah, it just hits me on so many levels, to be able to play that song and hear her voice. And it's like it's that trippy thing of like when you listen to somebody for a long time and then you're finally like in the room with them and you hear them in your ears or in the just in your own ears, like in the room. It just kind of takes on a life of its own and becomes this whole other thing. And I think that just sort of hit me with her and that song and playing gigs with her. And yeah, so that's the answer to that one.
So, final Sarah McLachlan question. So, she has 4 shows coming up in July,
Yeah.
but they are all acoustic. They're all solo acoustic. Matt, how dare she? How dare she?
Yeah, Sarah. Well, here's the thing. Sarah, she
I mean,
like
shouldn't she have like bongos or
percussion
like
or something.
djembe
Yeah.
or something?
I gotta talk to her. I gotta call her up. Hey, let's just add one more person, Yeah, well, the good thing is, I can't say too much right now, but there's some really cool stuff planned for 24. And, I think we're doing some one-off things through the rest of this year. And but she does have this duo thing with a really amazing cellist, from here named Vanessa Freebairn Smith. And they do, a handful of runs, gigs every year with just that crew. And people, that's the thing. I'll tell you this as a sort of parting thought. It's like I always say, and one of the reasons why I love like Neil and Joni, and I don't know if you've seen on YouTube those BBC live concerts from back in the day, like from the early '70s, and like there's a James Taylor one and a Neil one and a Joni one and a Cat Stevens
I've
one.
seen the James Taylor one actually. Yeah.
Yeah, so you know how like artists on that level, songwriters on that level, like they can just be there with themselves and their instrument, and it just like is so compelling. And I feel like Sarah is just straight out of that tradition. Like she doesn't, Sarah can go and play in front of 350,000 people if it was to come to that by herself with her piano and her guitar, and would just absolutely captivate the audience because she's that good. And that's the kind of stuff that when you see it and you're around it, you can't help but be affected by it in a positive way. And so yeah, that's how I feel about that. And I actually have been meaning to go to one of those solo shows. She did a California run last year, and I was all set to go. And then my wife and I thought we might have COVID, so we stayed away, unfortunately. And it turns out we didn't, but we wanted to make sure nobody else got it, so we we stayed at home. But one of these days we're going to go to one of those. So yeah,
So I have 3 final questions. Can you handle 3 final
I
questions?
sure can. Yes.
So the first thing is we have a tradition on this podcast where the current guest leaves a question that I will ask for the next guest without knowing who they are, what industry they're in, male, female, age, anything. So I'll start by asking you the question left by the last guest. So the
Okay.
last guest was J.W. Jones, an incredible guitarist and singer-songwriter.
Yeah.
And his question is, who is your not obvious celebrity crush? So he said not obvious because most people don't think about it and they say Brad Pitt or Shania Twain or,
Yeah.
obviously like the sex symbols over the years. So he wants
Right.
more of like a ridiculous celebrity crush where it's like, you're not quite sure why you're so attracted to this person.
So it's not necessarily like a physical attraction thing, right? It could be like just great admiration or something like that.
Yeah, you could take it any way you want, but that's the
Okay.
question. Got to take a
Well,
sip before you answer this one.
yeah. So like, yeah, I need my just a little bit of extra coffee. No, you know what? I actually have this will be a pretty left coming out of left field sort of answer, but I admire and have an artistic crush on. There's I can I say two people? Is it okay to say two
Absolutely,
people?
yes. I
Okay, for
encourage a
the
second
same
one.
reasons, actually, pretty similar. Um, Neil Young, because I've already mentioned him, and Harrison Ford. And let me tell you why. Because I'm just in such great admiration of who they are as people. And when I see an interview with them and hear them speak about art and about their art and about art in general, I'm just blown away. And they think in such a way that really hits me on an emotional level and makes me want to be not like them, but strive for the same kind of level of achievement and excellence, and their artistic integrities, especially like those are the big ones for me. Um, and so, yeah, that's those are my celebrity crushes. Those are guys I would want to model myself after, artistically speaking.
Perfect. And can you now pay it forward and provide a question for the next guest?
Yes. Um, I would ask whoever the next person that you interview is, um, to pick one event, could be if they're a musician, a gig, or whatever experience it is, that made the hairs on their arms stand up just by being there, just by being a part of it. So when you're in that moment and it's like you're almost having an out of body experience because you're a part of something that's deep, heavy, whatever you want to say. That's my question.
Great question. And final two questions for you. When you look back on your life and career, what are you most proud of? And then what are you most grateful for?
Yeah, that's good. When I moved out here, and beforehand, I had the goal in mind of like, I saw these guys who lived in LA and also just everywhere, but specifically in LA um, who got to contribute to great music and great art as a drummer, as a side person, whether it was recording, playing live on touring, and all of those different things. I saw those guys and admired them for being able to do all of those things, and I wanted to be able to do that. So I'm very proud of the fact that I've been given those opportunities and that I've been ready for them, and that I've just had the privilege of doing that myself. And I feel like I set those goals for myself. And when I look back on it, it's been a windy road, and I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I did, and that makes me really proud. And for the same reason, I'm grateful for the community of people who I've surrounded myself with here. Like I feel like it took me some time to find them, but now I have like a group of people who are like family to me, but they're musicians and they're friends, and they're not my physical blood family, but they feel like actual family to me. And we help each other. We get each other work. We support each other through the tough times. We help each other, do whatever as friends. And we understand what each other are going through. And I'm super grateful for that because I wouldn't be able to survive without it.
Awesome. And what advice, this is the final question here. What advice would you give your 10-year-old self? So you could walk into a room and there's cute little 10-year-old Matt sitting there, and you could whisper words of advice in his ear, taking all the years of mentorship and lessons learned and training and achievements and failures and everything. What do you whisper to little Matt to help him through this human experience?
Um, I would say, even though a 10-year-old might not fully grasp this, the words being in their ears would be important, which is something my mom has actually said to me a million times in my life, which is the expression is take the mountain out of it, which is like there are these things that you want to achieve, but you have to take the mountain out of it. I think visually speaking, like don't think of it as like Mount Everest. Every day is like a little bit of progress. Every day is another step in the direction you want to go in. And I would say that to that 10-year-old me, because that 10-year-old me was very, very nervous and very insecure and very, you know, just had a lot of self-doubt. And I think hearing those words, even though my mom did say them to me, hearing them earlier and earlier and earlier would just be a great way to, like, encourage a 10-year-old me to not be so nervous about everything, like just take it one day at a time, take it an hour at a time. I still have to tell myself that constantly. So, yeah.
Yeah, small daily incremental improvements compound over time into just massive, massive results.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep.
There you go. There, we're on the
Yeah.
same page.
Yeah.
Where can our listeners find you online? So website, social media, if they want to reach out and say, hey, I love the interview, or I could use some recorded drums for my project, or I'd like some online lessons, or they just want to be in the loop for upcoming events that you're performing on, where do
Right.
they go?
Yeah, so the two main places would be my website and my Instagram, which are both the same thing, which is The Real Matt Starr, and that's with two T's and two R's. So at The Real Matt Starr on Instagram, and www.therealmattstarr.com online, which has both things are connected there, and you can contact me either way through the website form, or DM me on Instagram.
And do you have any final words for your fans that have been supporting you from the very beginning through, all the amazing things you've accomplished, but that have been there from the start? Any words for the fans?
I just think that if anybody finds what I do inspiring, then I'm really grateful to, just be thought of that way. And I want to inspire people, and I hope I do. And just thank you for, being open to me and what I do, because that's a privilege in its own right.
All right. So as we wrap up, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you for your lifelong pursuit of mastery as a drummer. I want to acknowledge you for providing drum lessons, which is you passing on your wisdom to the next generation, allowing young drummers to become the best that they can be, and go on to maybe have a career as well in music. I want to acknowledge you for offering the service of the remote drum recording, because this allows independent artists an affordable way to have great sounding recordings, and maybe they couldn't afford that otherwise. So you're helping them flesh out their dreams as well. So it's a lot deeper than just providing this service. I want to thank you for drumming with Sarah McLachlan and Buffy St. Marie, which keeps those two amazing artists going, right? If they don't find the right drummers, maybe they're not playing as much. So you're keeping those legacies going into the future, which is awesome. And last but not least, I want to thank you for spending the last 2+ hours with me with this interview, allowing me to pick your brain. It's always awesome to just geek out over music with a fellow musician. So Matt, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to come on and speak with you. And it's been really inspiring. And I always love meeting other people who love music. And that's just, I only want to talk to people who it sounds bad, but I kind of just want to spend most of my time talking to people who love music, because that's everything to me. So thank you.
Those are your people. So you're very welcome, and thank you so much for the kind words. To our listeners, to the Matt Starr fans, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed today's episode of the podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. What I want to know is, who would you like me to sit down with next for a 2-hour deep dive interview? You can let me know by reaching out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel. And you can find me on Twitter and Snapchat at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.